Okay, now this is lesson 7.6, which is the Jews of Salonika and Auschwitz-Birkenau, including the story of Jackie Handeli from Salonika in Auschwitz, or in Buna, Auschwitz 3. There were 12,000 Salonican Jews who were selected for forced labor, who weren't gassed immediately upon arrival in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Auschwitz number 1 was the main camp, but most of the Jews went to Birkenau. And then those that were selected for labor worked in Birkenau, and those that were gassed, mostly were gassed in Birkenau. Later on, a large group of maybe of 2,000 Jews was taken to Auschwitz III, which was the Monowitz IG Farben Buna industrial installations and a concentration camp also. So there were about 2,000 Salonikans there also. So Bauman talked about the arbitrariness of the Jews of Greece and in general in slave labor in Auschwitz. So he wrote, survival in the German concentration camps was a complicated problem for the Greek Jews, ignorant of a hostile reality, totally alien in terms of language, culture, and physical environment. There was cold and snow to what they had known, or which was different to their Mediterranean homeland. So the prisoners couldn't control their own destiny, they couldn't control their work assignments, there was a risk of stratification or a danger factor in various commandos. Here the camp resistance, or protexia, amongst those with power and influence, was extremely important in the rescue of certain individuals or types. Some commandos were designed to kill the prisoner as rapidly and cruelly as possible, especially the Strafkommando. Life expectancy was less than 2 weeks, to which one may be assigned for any infraction of the rules. So those from Salonika were deported in the spring of 1943. Those from the southern part of Greece, or the areas that were Italian that became German, were deported in the spring of 1944. So they would have been in Auschwitz, the latter group, less than a year, or even in the death camps, less than a year or about a year, depending on where they were deported from. So Salonican Jews were in the death and concentration camps 2 years. So for example, then he talks about, on the scale of survival, the deadliest level was that of hard labor, whether to prepare the infrastructure for building or mining, or the useless and sadistic hard labor intended to sap the starving prisoner of the last vestiges of his or her strength. Many of the Außenkommandos, those that worked outside the camp, involved such killing labor. Only a minuscule percentage of those Jews assigned to such work, intellectuals especially, were singled out for such a fate, were able to survive, and usually only through the help of others. And then those that had some skill, let's say if they were shoemakers or seamstresses or painters or carpenters or builders, they would survive because they had easier work commandos. And then there were those who were mechanics or engineers or musicians or prostitutes or boxers. They had an advantage. The boxers also worked in a kitchen. They could get food. So Jackie Handeli talks about being in Buna, in Auschwitz III. Buna was owned by the IG Farben company, which has been an ongoing concern until today. The first consignment of some 200 Salonican Jews to Buna was sent on May 2nd, that's 1943. Within a year, some 3,000 Greek Jews worked at the IG Farben complex. I think over 100,000 people worked at the complex. Not all the workers were concentration camp inmates like us. We were, of course, the cheapest labor, but not all the workers were Jewish or prisoners. The daily routine of a prisoner at Auschwitz-Monowitz began at least 2 hours before he had to be on the parade ground. The block elders used to wake up everybody at 4 a.m. Drowsy and exhausted, the prisoners ran nearly naked through the snow in fierce Upper Silesian cold and wind to a building some distance from the blocks where we were washed. The block elder and his assistants made sure everyone washed, and then after a few minutes, wet and shivering, ran back to the blocks. We did not have towels and dried ourselves as best as we could with our hats. Neither we were allowed straight back to the relative shelter of our blocks. The block elder's assistants waited at the block entrance and distributed our daily food ration. Each of us got some ersatz coffee, a funny-looking black liquid, in the bowl which we had to carry with us day and night, along with our daily bread ration. Each slice was between 100 to 120 grams, depending on how the block elder happened to slice it. We also got 5 to 6 grams of synthetic margarine, and that was our daily food ration, along with a liter soup in the evening. Only after everyone received his ration were the prisoners allowed to go back into the block. We ate all our food in seconds. Very few put some into their pockets to nibble on it during the day. The food break was a short fare indeed, and as it was over, we were ordered straight out the beds. All 3 levels of beds had to be made up with precision. Our bedding consisted of 1 blanket, a pillow, and a straw-filled mattress, and these had to be arranged perfectly. An iron wire was stretched the 150-meter distance from the first bed to the last, and everyone's pillow had to touch it. Every prisoner had 2 wooden planks with handles, which were used to straighten out the mattress and blanket. The worst possible work detail, which my brothers and I belonged to at first, was the cable detail. Its job was the digging of trenches and laying lead cables composed of many small wires which had diameters of 20 to 30 centimeters. I'm not sure whether they were electric or telephone cables or for some other purpose. They were very heavy and had to be dragged on our backs and then buried in the trenches. Almost all the Salonikans worked at first in this detail, as they were strong people. A lot of them worked as support, or they were stevedores, or they were hamalis, they were porters, they were moving men. Many died while working in that detail. In the mornings we tried to evade work there, but it was almost impossible. We got a half-hour break during work in which we were given a liter of soup, which was basically just muddy water, warmed over. Once in a while, some lucky prisoner would find a piece of cabbage or a potato in it. Only prisoners who worked in factories that made up about 90% of the camp got the soup. The remaining 10% performed various service jobs in the camp. At 6 p.m., we'd walk back the 7 kilometers to the camp, needless to say, under SS guard. If one of us died, say by falling from a high place during the work, we would have to drag his body back to camp so that the number of those returning always equaled the number of those who left in the morning. My brother Shmuel was the strongest man I had ever known and was my boyhood hero. Large, well-built, he was a Samson-like figure who fought the Germans, was wounded and decorated. It seemed he was all-powerful. Yet now, 3 months after we arrived in Buna, he started slowly turning into a Mussulman, term used for the inmates for a walking corpse, and hence a candidate for selection, being sent to the gas chambers. Selection was performed without advance notice. We had to walk past a certain block completely naked. The reason for this was that in the process of becoming a Mussulman, a person became a skeleton and his buttocks completely wasted away. The German officer who performed the selection, apparently a doctor, did not look into people's faces, just at their buttocks. When the buttocks were completely flat, the person had reached the end of his life. So they had typhus, they had illnesses, but people swindled, they stole, and it was a vicious, cruel life. Most of the Jews, most of the Salonican Jews, died from the forced labor, from the terrible conditions, from the starvation, from the disease, from the despair, and that's the story.